Have you ever seen one of those situations on Rotten Tomatoes where the critics all love something and the actual audience all hates it? It's really, really fun to me, or the other way around, I suppose, as well. Because it's just delightful, isn't it? The deconstructionist, take that authority figure part of me is just tickled by these elite film critic geniuses who look at these different movies and they're like, oh yeah, that is brave and courageous and it signals everything in exactly the right way. And I like all of those opinions. And I can just say I agree with his movie and I'm going to look automatically good. But the general audiences, they still like the same stuff the general audiences have liked forever. And that is stories that are good and compelling and interesting and maybe have a point or a theme and characters who are likable and maybe some kind of clarity on the whole good and evil thing. They're not interested, for the most part, in movies that are advancing some sort of complex political cause or that work better for one team or the other. Just give me a great story. And so when that happens and an enlightened movie comes out, the critics will all fall all over themselves and say, it's the best movie in the history of ever. I mean, I saw the other day that like 80 of the top 100 movies of all time, according to Rotten Tomatoes, have come out in like the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, something's wrong there. That is not reflective of truth. But then the audience sees a movie like that, and they're like, "Yuck. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an idiot. I see what you're trying to do, and I don't know. I mean, you might have a point or whatever, but I was more hoping the movie would be good, and then it wasn't. I was bored, and I thought it was dumb." So I'm going to say that movie was not fresh. So the critics are like 98% and the audience is like at 30. And again, I say it's just fun when the masses push back on the elites and the smarty smarts to be like, nah, I don't think you really understand how the things are or what we really want or what reality really is. And such a disparity is what we are looking at in Matthew chapter 21, coming off of the cleansing of the temple. You got to figure that Jesus is going and wrecking a bunch of stuff in this very sacred place and showing disrespect to the system that the religious elites and the culture shapers have made is going to create some kind of giant crisis of confidence in him, but it seems to do the exact opposite. So we've looked at Matthew 21, 12 through 13, a whole bunch. That's Jesus flipping over tables and all of that. And then the very next thing after Jesus gets done doing that is verse 14 of Matthew 21. Jesus has come into Jerusalem. He's making waves. People are initially excited to see him. He turns over tables, and then the blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple area, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant. "Do you hear what these children are saying?" they asked him. "Yeah," Jesus replied. "Have you never read? From the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise." And he left them and went out to the city of Bethany, where he spent the night. The religious critics, they're like, oh, this is going to go over terribly. You can't come in here like that. You can't mess with our thing. Look, everyone is doing it. Everyone is participating. They're all getting in line. They're all doing all the things that the authority figures and uniformed people are saying to do. They're all being terribly orderly. That definitely means consent. And what they don't get is, no, it doesn't. It means that they're not willing to risk what it takes to throw off your stupid thing, even though they don't like it. What it represents is begrudgingly going along with something. What it represents is the power of making something mandatory with the force of the sword or enormous social consequences behind it. But we pretty quickly get to the heart of the audience and realize that, oh, wow, when push comes to shove, no, they kind of want to flip over tables too. And so we get this delightful juxtaposition where the fancy people see who Jesus is and what he's doing, and they're like, oh, gross. Now we know who you are. We're giving this a negative review, and we're going to come chide you. But the people who are the least desirable in all of society, the blind, the lame, the outsiders, people who at that time many would have imagined had such afflictions because there was something wrong with their soul, or maybe their parents did something wrong. Those kind of people are like, wow, we see exactly who you are, even though our eyes don't work, and we want more of that. Thumbs up on the table flipping and the Messiah business. We are in. And so they drag themselves over to Jesus. They feel their way along the walls to get over to where Jesus is at in the temple. And Jesus, in keeping with this theme that we keep on seeing being repeated, Jesus heals them. He has compassion on these weak, lowly, culturally not respected, not desirable types. And he just keeps responding that way, even though he's got such bigger fish to fry. he's going to get executed. It would be okay to take a couple of days and be like, I'm sorry, guys. I know you're blind and lame and stuff, and I do want to deal with that, but I am about to be murdered, and I'm a little stressed out, and I just need to get back to my center here for a little while. Nah, you put Jesus under pressure, and he just keeps doing the same thing, showing compassion on the masses. You put him under pressure by executing his cousin and implicitly saying you're going to do the same thing to him, and he wants to take a breather from that, but then he sees a whole bunch of people who are hungry and want to be fed spiritually and physically, and he's like, yeah, all right, I'll break the laws of time and space to feed you physically, even though I could maybe use some downtime. And further, sure, I have compassion on you. Here are the words of life. Here is truth. You see Jesus getting the first exposure to the pressure mounting early on in the Gospel of Matthew, and he responds to that pressure not with disgust toward the people who are wrong. Nope, instead of like crawling under a rock because he got a bunch of mean, aggressive comments and threats, he instead responds to all of that, Matthew 9, end of the chapter, verse 36, responds to all of that by looking at the crowds and having compassion on them because they're harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he turns to his disciples and he says, hey, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. They just got done saying that he's in league with Lucifer. And Jesus is like, yeah, I got compassion on you, though. I get it. Things are pretty busted up around here. And hey, everybody pray for these people. And then John the Baptist doesn't know what to make of Jesus in chapter 11. And of all the people who should know, it should be John the Baptist, but he doesn't. And the smug crowds are there like, John the Baptist, an idiot. And Jesus is like, oh, yeah, okay, smart guy. What are you laughing at? And he points at all of them. And he's like, here's what's wrong with these towns around here. Here's what's wrong with your mindset about God and religion. He calls out their cynicism. And then he says back to this crowd, the crowd that just got a whole bunch of stuff wrong. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble of heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You're seeing the pattern here, right, my friends? You can't put so much pressure on Jesus of Nazareth that he quits caring about you, even if you're the one putting the pressure on him. Even if you're part of the idiot sheep crowd that is reading everything about the moment in history wrong and tweeting the wrong things and having the wrong opinions and missing the point and the signs and the cues, and you're socially off, it doesn't matter. He just feels unending compassion for you. And by you, I mean you and me. I don't just mean like really dumb bad people, like not you and me, they were like occasionally bad, but I mean like people who really don't get it. No, I mean like we really don't get it. And the same Jesus who feels that compassion that just keeps on happening, punctuating the book of Matthew, lest we start to think that people's anger and vitriol is winning the day. So the whole reason the whole cross and resurrection thing is going to happen is because this is who he is. Those are the kingdom values. He didn't come to be served. He came to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. He came to seek and save the lost. So it should be no surprise when we get back to Matthew chapter 21 that the pressure gets even higher in an even more pressurized geographic location. He just flipped over tables. It seems like everything is going to come to a head right now. And then people who can't even see can see who he actually is and what the kingdom actually is. And they don't care how stupid they look. They're going to crawl over there, grope their way over there to get to a place where the one they believe can do something about their problem can do something about their problem. And then Jesus does. Their faith is rewarded and he heals them and feels this compassion. And then you get the juxtaposition with the chief priests, the teachers of the law, the Pharisee crowd, the religious leadership establishment crowd, the fancy hoity-toity critic crowd. And they come along and they look at the thing and they're like, you blew it, pal. That is so wrong and so backwards and it's never going to play. Except it totally plays because the children are shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. These people are supposed to be Bible experts who always know what to say and what to do, and they're supposed to know how to guide the people toward intimacy with God. But it's going back to that Matthew 11, Isaiah 35 thing. When John the Baptist was like, hey, are you the Son of God? Are you the Messiah? Should we be expecting somebody else? And Jesus was like, oh, well, go back and tell John what you hear and see. And what does he go through? Like the blind receive sight, the lame walk, and the deaf can hear. Leprosy, I think, is in there somewhere too. And that's a reference, you'll recall, to Isaiah 35, which is like the smoking gun mark of what it's going to look like when the Messiah shows up. And so when John the Baptist asks, it's almost like Jesus is like, you can remember the Bible or whatever? I mean, this is kind of like your job as you talk about things like this. And Isaiah 35, which is talking about what the kingdom is going to be like, and everything that's broken and ugly and gross and black and burned out turns green and alive and redeemed and beautiful again. And part of it right here in verse 5 is, then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer and the mute tongue shout for joy. All that language is in Isaiah chapter 35, and Jesus has already spoken to this once. He's like, I don't know, can the blind see? The deaf hearing again? Can the lame walk? Well, then what do you think is going on here, John the Baptist? What do you think is going on here, crowd? And now here we are back in Matthew chapter 21, and it's the same stuff. The blind and the lame, who are literally indicators of when the kingdom is coming and the Messiah is here, are being healed in response to this thing. And the people whose job it is to see that with eyes wide open and be like, oh, there he is. That's our whole job, is to point to the Messiah. Instead are like, you shouldn't have done that, and this is really unpopular, and you should make kids stop saying things about you that are positive. It's just a really, really entertaining, even cathartic juxtaposition between these two things, and it absolutely plays out further on this theme that we've seen all throughout Matthew about God opening the eyes of the blind, literally and metaphorically, so that they can see stuff. Saul was literally blind in Acts, and then the scales fell off his eyes, and he could see and understand how the things actually were. And yet these people who are the elite fancy critics, they just cannot help themselves. They cannot open their eyes to what is actually going on here. And thus, this whole Jesus coming into Jerusalem and cleansing the temple thing receives very different reviews between the critic class and the normal person class. If you like this kind of internet, one of the ways you can get behind it is to go to patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. If you want to jump in and support 1 week a month, you can do that. You can support every week a month if you want to do that, or you can not support the podcast if you would prefer to do that, and that is also cool. I really enjoy getting to do this. Thanks to all of you for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10 Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.